The satellite feed cut to static at 4:47 hours, and somewhere in the Hindu Kush, 8 Navy SEALs stopped transmitting. Command replayed the last 7 seconds of audio until the words lost meaning. Gunfire. Shouting. Then a sound like the earth swallowing itself whole. The operations center at Bagram went silent in that particular way that means men are already dead, and someone's about to make a decision that can't be unmade. Colonel Vance stood with his arms crossed, staring at the empty grid square on the screen where his team had simply ceased to exist. Outside, the rotors of a quick reaction force spun up, then powered down. Too far, too hot. The valley was a killbox now, and nobody knew who controlled it. Intelligence said a high-value target was moving through the area. The SEALs had gone in light and fast, planning to be out before sunrise. Now the sun was coming up, and all anyone had was silence. Vance turned to his air liaison. "What's airborne?" The major checked his tablet. "2 Vipers just hit bingo fuel. There's a Hog 15 minutes out." Vance's jaw tightened. The warthog, slow, ugly, close to the ground. Exactly the kind of aircraft that got shredded in a valley with no room to maneuver. "Who's flying it?" The major hesitated. "Callsign Nailbiter, Captain Raina Kovac." Vance's expression didn't change, but everyone in the room felt the shift. Kovac. The name landed like a stone in still water. She'd been flying combat sorties for 3 years, longer than most, but she was still the pilot people mentioned in the wrong tone. Too cautious, too methodical. The kind of pilot who checked her six twice and never pushed the envelope. She'd never had a golden BB moment, never pulled off the kind of save that made briefing rooms go quiet. Competent, sure. But not the person you wanted when 8 SEALs were bleeding out in a canyon and the enemy had every ridgeline zeroed in. Vance looked at the map. The valley was a 12-mile scar in the mountains, narrow and deep, with anti-aircraft positions marked in red. Thermals would be hell, dust would cut visibility to nothing. And somewhere in that chaos his men were waiting for a miracle. "She's all we have," the major said. Vance nodded once. "Then she'll have to be enough." Nobody said what they were all thinking. That enough might not be enough. That Kovac flew like someone who'd already lost something and couldn't afford to lose again. That in 15 minutes this op would either become a legend or another classified failure buried in a folder nobody opened. The comms operator broke the silence. "Nailbiter is inbound. She's requesting grid and threat assessment." Vance picked up the radio. His hand was steady. His voice was not. The A-10 Thunderbolt II was never designed to be beautiful. It was built around a cannon, a 7-barrel rotary beast that could spit 30mm rounds through a tank like it was cardboard. Everything else, wings, engines, armor, was an afterthought. The aircraft didn't glide. It didn't soar. It prowled. Low and slow, with a sound that made infantrymen weep with relief and enemies dig deeper into the earth. Raina Kovac sat in the cockpit, hands light on the stick, eyes scanning the horizon as the mountains rose ahead like broken teeth. Her helmet visor reflected the dawn, orange and gold bleeding into the gray. She'd been airborne for 90 minutes, flying a routine patrol along the Pakistani border when the call came through. "SEALs down. Position unknown. Heavy contact. Immediate CAS requested. Close air support." The words every attack pilot lived for and dreaded in equal measure. She banked east, throttling up as much as the Warthog's twin turbofans allowed, and checked her weapons loadout. Full gun, Hydra rockets, 2 Mavericks, enough to ruin someone's day if she could find the target, if she could get there in time. The radio crackled. "Nailbiter, this is Overlord. How copy?" "Overlord, Nailbiter. Lima Charlie. Send traffic." Colonel Vance's voice was clipped, professional, but she could hear the edge beneath it. "Grid November Tango 6472. Callsign Sabre 11 is 8 packs, no comms for 20 mics. Last known position inside Valley Complex. Threat assessment, heavy small arms, possible ZSU, unknown RPG concentrations. Advise extreme caution on approach." Raina's jaw tightened. ZSU. A Russian-made anti-aircraft gun that could swat an A-10 out of the sky if the crew knew what they were doing. And in these mountains they usually did. She pulled up the grid on her knee display. The valley was a nightmare. Steep walls. No egress routes. A shooting gallery. Overlord Nailbiter confirmed no other air assets available. A pause long enough to be an answer. Negative, Nailbiter, you're it. She exhaled slowly, keyed the mic. Copy all, Nailbiter inbound, ETA 12 minutes. She didn't wait for acknowledgement. The mountains were close now, their shadows swallowing the valleys. Somewhere down there, 8 men were fighting for their lives or already dead. She pushed the thought away, focused on the instruments, altitude, airspeed. Fuel, the A-10 rumbled beneath her, steady and sure. People said the warthog was ugly. Raina had never understood that. To her it was honest. It didn't pretend to be something it wasn't. It was armor and firepower and endurance, nothing more. It did the job and came home. Most of the time she thought about the last mission brief. The way the other pilots had looked at her, not hostile, just dismissive, like she was furniture, kvetch, solid, reliable, boring. Never the first pick for the hard calls. The valley opened below her like a wound in the earth, narrow and deep, the sides scarred with scree and stunted trees clinging to impossible angles. Raina dropped altitude, bringing the A-10 down to 8,000 feet, then 6. The terrain rose to meet her, the ridgelines sharp enough to cut. She could see smoke now, thin gray columns rising from the valley floor, spreading in the wind. Gunfire or explosives, maybe both. Her radar warning receiver stayed quiet. No lock, not yet. She keyed the radio. Overlord Nailbiter, I have visual on smoke, attempting to establish comms with Saber 11. She switched frequencies, calling into the void. Saber 11, this is Nailbiter on CAS push. How copy? Static. She tried again. Any Saber element, Nailbiter is overhead, standing by for talk on. Nothing. The silence pressed against her eardrums like deep water. She scanned the valley through the canopy, eyes tracing the smoke trails, looking for movement, for muzzle flashes, for anything that would tell her where the SEALs were and what they were facing. The problem with close air support was the close part. Drop ordnance too near your own people, and you'd kill the men you came to save. Too far, and you'd waste precious seconds, precious ammunition on empty ground. She needed eyes. She needed someone on the ground to mark targets, to talk her onto the enemy. But the SEALs weren't answering, which meant they were either too busy staying alive to use a radio or they were past needing one. Raina banked left, tightening the turn, feeling the G-forces press her into the seat. The warthog responded like a truck on ice, slow, heavy, but absolutely committed once it got moving. She dropped lower, 4,000 feet. The valley walls rose on either side now, close enough that she could see individual boulders, the dark mouths of caves. Her pulse stayed even. Training took over. Scan, assess, prioritize. She saw the compound first. A cluster of mud brick buildings on the valley floor, maybe a dozen structures around a central courtyard. One wall was collapsed. Smoke poured from a rooftop. And there, movement. Figures running between buildings, some in groups, some alone. Too far to identify as friendly or hostile. She climbed slightly, gaining perspective, and that's when she saw the technical. A pickup truck with a heavy machine gun mounted in the bed, parked behind a berm on the north side of the compound. The gun was pointed up, at her. Her radar warning receiver screamed. Missile lock. Her hands moved on instinct. Chaff, flares, brake right. The A-10 groaned, rolling hard, the horizon tilting as she pulled the stick back and threw the aircraft into a dive. The missile, if it was a missile, didn't follow. False alarm. Just the RWR picking up a targeting radar. But the message was clear. They knew she was here. Raina leveled out at 3,000 feet, her breathing controlled, her heart a steady drum. The technical was still there, the gunner tracking her movement. She could take it out. One burst from the GAU-8 would turn the truck into scrap. But if the SEALs were near that compound, if they were hiding in one of those buildings, she'd be firing blind. She needed confirmation. Saber 11, Nailbiter, if you're receiving, pop smoke, any color. She counted to 10, 20. Her eyes swept the compound. And then there, a thin trail of orange smoke, barely visible against the dust and haze, rising from behind a low wall on the east side. Raina's chest tight. They were alive. The smoke marker told her everything she needed to know: location, status, desperation. Orange meant they were in contact, taking fire and running out of options. She marked the position mentally, then looked back at the technical. The angle was good. The gun crew was focused on her, not the SEALs. She armed the cannon. The A-10's nose contained 73 inches of pure violence, a weapon so powerful that when it fired, the aircraft slowed in midair from the recoil. Reyna had put thousands of rounds downrange in training. She knew the sound it made, the way the whole jet shuddered like something alive and angry. She rolled in. The valley walls blurred. The compound grew in her canopy, altitude winding down, 2,000 feet, 1,500. The targeting pipper settled on the technical. Her thumb hovered over the trigger. Nail-biters in hot, the cannon roared. For 2 seconds the world was nothing but noise and thunder. The GAU-8 fired at a rate of 40 rounds per second, each shell the size of a beer bottle, each one capable of punching through concrete. The technical disintegrated. The truck's frame split in half. The machine gun tore free and tumbled across the ground. The berm behind it exploded into dust. Reyna pulled up, the G-forces pressing her into the seat, and climbed. Her hands were steady. The valley fell away beneath her. She keyed the mic. Overlord Nailbiter, technical destroyed. Saber element is marked east side of compound, requesting instructions. Vance's voice came back immediately. Nailbiter Overlord, Saber reports 8 packs alive, 3 wounded. They're pinned by fire from the ridgeline northwest bearing. Unknown number of hostiles. They need immediate suppression. Reyna's eyes flicked to the ridgeline. It was a wall of rock and shadow, honeycombed with crevices and ledges. Perfect cover for a dug-in enemy. Perfect place to hide a ZSU. Copy, she said. Nailbiter is rolling in. She banked hard, lining up her approach, and saw the muzzle flashes. Small bursts of light scattered along the ridge like stars, AK fire. Maybe a PKM. She toggled to rockets. The Hydra pods hung beneath her wings, each one loaded with 1970mm warheads. Area suppression. She'd blanket the ridgeline, force the enemy to take cover, give the SEALs a chance to move. The approach was textbook. Reyna came in from the south, keeping the valley wall on her right, using the terrain to mask her profile. The enemy would hear her before they saw her, and by then it would be too late. The A-10's engines made a distinctive sound, a high-pitched whine that didn't match the aircraft's brutal reputation. Some pilots hated it. Reyna found it comforting. It meant the jet was still flying. She pickled the rockets at 2,000 feet. The Hydra pods rippled, launching in a staggered sequence, each rocket trailing a thin line of smoke. They arced through the air, then slammed into the ridgeline in a series of sharp, overlapping detonations. Rock and dust exploded outward. The muzzle flashes stopped. Reyna didn't celebrate. She climbed, rolled, and came around for another pass, eyes scanning for secondary positions. The SEALs would be moving now, using the suppression to reposition, to consolidate, to treat their wounded. She had to keep the pressure on, had to make the enemy believe the sky itself was hunting them. The radio crackled, a new voice, ragged, breathing hard. Nailbiter, Saber 11 actual, that was, goddamn beautiful. We're moving to exfil point 200 meters south. Can you keep their heads down? Reyna felt something unclench in her chest. Saber 11 Nailbiter, affirm, I'm not going anywhere. She meant it. The A-10 could loiter for hours, circling like a patient predator, waiting for targets to show themselves. She had fuel, she had ammunition, and she had 8 men on the ground who needed her. The enemy tried to reposition. She saw them moving along the ridge, dark shapes against the pale rock, and she rolled in again. This time she used the gun, short bursts, precise. The GAU-8 didn't just destroy targets, it erased them. The rock where the fighters had been standing turned to powder. She pulled up, her breathing still controlled, her mind calm. This was the part of the job people didn't understand. It wasn't about adrenaline or glory. It was about focus, about staying cold when everything around you was fire and chaos. Her father had taught her that. He'd been a pilot too, A-4 Skyhawks in Vietnam, back when close air support meant flying so low you could see the fear in the enemy's eyes. He told her once that the best pilots were the ones who could turn off their feelings and turn on their instincts, who could make life-and-death decisions in the space between heartbeats and never look back. He died when she was 12. Engine failure on a training flight. They'd found the wreckage scattered across a Kansas wheat field, the plane in pieces, the pilot still strapped to his seat. She joined the Air Force the day after her 18th birthday. The SEALs moved through the valley like shadows, fast and low, carrying their wounded between them. Reyna tracked their progress from above. her eyes constantly shifting between the team and the surrounding terrain. She saw the enemy trying to flank them, a group of 6 fighters moving through a dried riverbed, using the dead ground to stay hidden. She put a Maverick missile into the center of the formation. The AGM-65 was a fire-and-forget weapon, guided by infrared targeting. Once it locked, nothing could stop it. The missile streaked downward, contrail bright against the morning sky, and detonated in a flash of orange and black. The riverbed disappeared in smoke. Reyna didn't wait to confirm the kill. She was already scanning for the next threat. Nailbiter, Saber 1-1, we're at the exfil point, popping purple smoke now. She saw it immediately. A violet cloud rising from a flat stretch of ground near the valley mouth. The SEALs had made it. Now they just needed to survive long enough for the helicopters to arrive. Saber 1-1, Nailbiter, I have visual on purple. Be advised, you've got movement from the west approximately 400 meters, looks like vehicles. She squinted through the canopy. 2 technicals racing along a dirt track heading straight for the exfil point. Each one carried a machine gun and at least 5 fighters. If they reached the SEALs before the helos arrived, it would be a massacre. Reyna checked her weapons. 1 Maverick left, half her cannon rounds. Enough. She rolled in, bringing the A-10 down into the valley lower than she'd flown all morning. The walls closed in on either side. The technical crews saw her coming and opened fire. Tracer rounds arced upward, bright lines of light that looked slow until you realized they were moving at supersonic speeds. She ignored them, focused on the lead truck, fired the Maverick. The missile took 3 seconds to impact. The technical exploded, flipping end over end, bodies tumbling through the air. The second truck swerved, trying to evade, but Reyna was already on it. She lined up the shot, squeezed the trigger, and the cannon roared. The truck disintegrated. The fighters scattered, running for cover, and she stitched the ground behind them with gunfire, forcing them back, away from the SEALs. Nailbiter, Saber 1-1, you just saved our asses. Reyna didn't reply. Her radar warning receiver was screaming again. This time it wasn't a false alarm. Somewhere on the ridgeline, a ZSU had just locked onto her. She had maybe 3 seconds before it fired. The ZSU-23-4 Shilka was a Soviet-era monster, a tracked vehicle with 4 23mm autocannons that could pump out over 3,000 rounds per minute. It was designed to shred low-flying aircraft, and it was very good at its job. Reyna's hands moved before her brain caught up. She dumped chaff, popped flares, and threw the A-10 into a hard left brake, pulling so many GS that her vision tunneled. The Shilka fired. She heard it more than saw it, a sound like ripping fabric magnified 1,000 times. Tracer rounds streaked past her canopy, close enough that she could see their glow. 1 round clipped her left stabilizer. The A-10 shuddered. Warning lights flashed on her panel, hydraulic pressure dropping. Flight control degraded, but the jet kept flying. That was the thing about the Warthog. It was built to take damage. The cockpit was surrounded by a titanium bathtub, and the control systems had redundancies on top of redundancies. You could lose an engine, half a wing, and most of your tail, and the A-10 would still bring you home. Reyna rolled right, then pulled up, using the terrain to break line of sight. The Shilka lost its lock. She climbed, putting distance between herself and the gun, her mind racing. She needed to find that ZSU. It would keep firing as long as she stayed in the valley, and eventually it would get lucky, or the SEALs would be caught in the crossfire. Overlord Nailbiter, taking AAA fire, hunting for the source. Vance's voice was tight. Nailbiter, exfil helos are inbound, ETA 5 mics. Can you stay on station? Reyna looked at her instruments. Fuel was getting low. Hydraulics were at 60%. 1 stabilizer was damaged. A smart pilot would pull off, let someone else finish the job. But there was nobody else. Affirm, I'm staying. She banked wide, circling the valley at 4,000 feet, her eyes scanning the ridgelines. The Shilka would be camouflaged, hidden under netting or tucked into a cave. But it had fired, which meant it had given away its position. She just had to find it there. A shadow on the north ridge, too square to be natural. She zoomed her targeting pod and the image resolved. A tracked vehicle, low profile, 4 barrels pointed skyward. The ZSU. It was exactly where it shouldn't be, close to the SEAL position, close enough that any airstrike risked collateral damage. Reyna's jaw tightened. She had one option: gun run, low and fast, put rounds directly onto the target before it could react. It was suicide. The Shilka would see her coming, would have time to track to fire to turn her A-10 into a cloud of shrapnel. But if she didn't take it out, the helicopters would fly into a kill zone. The SEALs would die waiting for a rescue that never came. She took a breath, keyed the mic. Sabre 1-1, nail-biter, stay down, this is gonna be close. Raina rolled, inverted, and dove. The valley filled her canopy, the ground rushing up at a speed that made her inner ear scream. She flipped upright at the last second, the A-10 groaning under the strain, and leveled out at 500 feet. The Shilka was dead ahead. She could see the crew now, tiny figures scrambling around the vehicle, realizing too late what was about to happen. Her thumb found the trigger. The world narrowed to a single point, the targeting pipper on her HUD, the crosshairs locked on the ZSU. She fired. The GAU-8 unleashed hell. 70 rounds in 2 seconds. 30mm depleted uranium shells that punched through the Shilka's armor like it was foil. The vehicle exploded, ammunition cooking off in a chain reaction that lit up the ridgeline. Raina pulled up, hauling back on the stick, and the damaged A-10 responded sluggishly. She cleared the ridge by less than 50 feet. Her radar warning receiver went silent. The threat was dead. She climbed, her hands shaking now, adrenaline finally catching up. Her voice was steady when she keyed the mic. Overlord Nailbiter, Shilka is destroyed, exfil route is clear. Vance's voice came back, and for the first time there was something other than tension in it. Nailbiter, Overlord, outstanding work. Hellos are on final. Sabre 1-1 is secure. Raina didn't respond. She banked away from the valley, climbing into the clean air above the mountains, and let herself breathe. Below, 2 Black Hawks swept into the valley, their rotors kicking up dust as they landed near the purple smoke. The SEALs loaded their wounded and climbed aboard. 30 seconds later, the helicopters lifted off, noses down, racing for safety. Raina watched them go. Her fuel gauge was blinking red. Time to head home. She turned west, toward Bagram, and the A-10 settled into a steady drone. The damaged stabilizer made the jet pull slightly to the left, but it was manageable. She'd make it back. She always did. The radio crackled. Nailbiter, Sabre 1-1 actual. It was the SEAL team leader, his voice rough but clear. I don't know how to say this, but thank you. You didn't just save us. You brought us home. We owe you. Raina's throat tight. She swallowed hard. Just doing my job. There was a pause, then, you did a hell of a lot more than that. The line went quiet. Raina flew on, alone in the sky, the sun burning bright on the horizon. She thought about her father, about the wheat field in Kansas, about all the pilots who'd gone into valleys like this one and never come out. She'd made it, and so had they. Bagram Airfield appeared through the haze, a sprawl of runways and hangars carved into the Afghan desert. Raina joined the pattern, called the tower, and brought the A-10 in on a long final approach. The landing gear clunked down. The damaged stabilizer shook. The jet touched down hard, the tires screeching, and she rode the brakes until the Warthog slowed to a walking pace. She taxied to the de-arm area, where a ground crew waited with fire extinguishers and wide eyes. As soon as she shut down the engines, they swarmed the aircraft, inspecting the damage, pointing at the holes in the tail. Raina climbed out, her legs unsteady, and pulled off her helmet. Her hair was matted with sweat. Her flight suit clung to her back. A crew chief approached, shaking his head. "Ma'am, you got hit," she nodded. "Yeah, you flew back like this. Didn't have much choice." He let out a low whistle. "You're lucky you didn't lose the whole tail." Raina looked at the A-10, at the torn metal and scorched paint, and felt a strange affection. "She's tough," the crew chief grinned. "So are you, apparently." Raina didn't answer. She walked toward the operations building, her body on autopilot, her mind still in the valley. She could still hear the Shilka firing, could still see the SEALs running through the smoke. She pushed through the door into the ops center. The room went quiet. Every head turned. Colonel Vance stood in the center, arms crossed, his face unreadable. For a long moment nobody spoke. Then Vance nodded once. "Hell of a job, Captain." It wasn't praise, not exactly, but coming from Vance it was close. Raina saluted. "Thank you, sir." He waved her off. "Get some rest, debrief in 2 hours." She turned to leave, but one of the intelligence officers called out. "Hey, nail-biter," she stopped. The officer was young, maybe 25, with the kind of enthusiasm that hadn't been beaten out of him yet. "That gun run on the Shilka, that was the craziest thing I've ever seen." Raina shrugged. "It needed doing." "Yeah, but," he hesitated. "You know what they're saying, right, about you?" She didn't want to. "They're saying you fly like you've got nothing to lose." Raina met his eyes. Her voice was quiet. "Maybe I don't." She walked out before he could respond. The sunlight hit her like a hammer, bright and hot and unforgiving. She headed for her quarters, ignoring the looks from other pilots, the whispers that followed her across the tarmac. Nailbiter. The name had started as a joke. She'd earned it during her first deployment when she'd aborted 3 landing attempts in a row because of crosswinds. The other pilots had laughed, called her cautious, called her scared. She'd never corrected them, let them think what they wanted. It was easier that way. But now, walking through the heat and dust with the memory of gunfire still ringing in her ears, she wondered if the name meant something different. If maybe it wasn't about fear. Maybe it was about the moment before a decision, the instant when you weighed the risks and chose to act anyway, knowing it might kill you. She reached her quarters, a cramped room with a cot and a locker. She sat down, still in her flight suit, and closed her eyes. Sleep didn't come. Raina lay on the cot, staring at the ceiling, her mind replaying the mission in loops. Every turn, every shot. Every second she'd been convinced the Shilka would find its mark and punch her out of the sky. She saw the technical exploding, the SEALs running, the smoke rising from the valley like prayers. At some point she must have dozed, because when she opened her eyes again, the light through the window had shifted. 2 hours had passed. Splashed water on her face, changed into a clean uniform, and walked back to the ops center. The debrief was standard. Vance asked questions. She answered them. Timeline, weapons expenditure, damage assessment, battle damage to her aircraft, effectiveness of the strikes. She spoke in the clipped, emotionless language of after-action reports, turning chaos into bullet points. When it was over, Vance leaned back in his chair. "The SEALs want to meet you," Raina blinked. "Sir." "They're at the med tent. Thought you might want to stop by." She hesitated. She didn't do well with gratitude, didn't know how to accept it without feeling like a fraud. But Vance was already standing, already walking toward the door. She followed. The medical tent smelled like antiseptic and dust. Inside, 8 men sat on cots or stood in small groups, some with bandages, some with 1,000-yard stares. They looked up when she entered. One of them, a stocky man with a beard and a sling on his left arm, stepped forward. His name tape read Kane. "You're nail-biter." It wasn't a question. Raina nodded. Kane extended his good hand. She shook it. His grip was firm, his eyes steady. "I'm Saber 11 Actual. You saved my team." Raina didn't know what to say. "I was just—" "Don't," Kane interrupted. "Don't do that. Don't downplay it." He glanced back at his men. "We were done, out of ammo, out of options, and then we heard that cannon." He shook his head. "I've been doing this for 12 years. I've worked with a lot of pilots, but I've never seen anyone fly like that." The other SEALs murmured agreement. One of them, a younger guy with a bandage across his forehead, spoke up. "You came in low, like stupid low. We could see you." Raina's throat tight. "Had to make sure I didn't hit you." Kane smiled. It was a tired smile, but genuine. "You didn't. You threaded the needle every single time." Another SEAL, older, with gray in his beard, stepped forward. "We heard the stories about you, about how you fly careful, methodical." He paused. "They got it wrong. You're not careful, you're precise. There's a difference." Raina looked at him, then at the others. They were watching her like she was something more than she was, like she'd done something extraordinary. She wanted to tell them the truth, that she'd been terrified, that every decision had felt like a coin flip, that she'd gotten lucky. But looking at their faces, dirty, exhausted, alive, she realized they didn't need to hear that. They needed to believe the sky had sent someone who knew exactly what she was doing, so she nodded. "Glad I could help." Kane clapped her on the shoulder. "If you ever need anything, you call us." She left the tent, the weight of their gratitude sitting heavy in her chest. Word spread fast on a base like Bagram. By the next morning, everyone knew what had happened in the valley. Raina became a curiosity. Pilots who'd never spoken to her before stopped her in the chow hall, asking about the gun run, the Shilka, the damage to her jet. She answered briefly, deflecting when she could, and ate alone. But the attention didn't stop. It followed her to the flight line, where her crew chief had painted a tiny silhouette of a ZSU beneath her canopy. "Figured you earned it," he said, grinning. Raina stared at the marking. It was small, almost hidden among the scuffs and scratches, but it was there, proof. She flew 3 more missions that week, routine patrols, no contact, but each time she launched she felt the difference. The tower controllers spoke to her with a new tone. The ground crews worked faster on her jet. Even the other A-10 pilots, the ones who'd ignored her for years, started including her in their pre-flight briefs. It wasn't respect. Not yet, but it was acknowledgement. On Friday, she was called to Colonel Vance's office. She knocked, entered, and stood at attention. Vance didn't look up from his desk. "At ease, Captain," she relaxed slightly. Vance signed a document, set it aside, and finally met her eyes. "You're being put in for a medal, Distinguished Flying Cross." Raina's stomach dropped. "Sir, I don't." "Not optional," Vance said. "You engaged a fortified anti-aircraft position at danger-close range to protect friendly forces. That's textbook DFC." He leaned back. "You should be proud." Raina didn't feel proud. She felt exposed. Medals meant ceremonies, speeches, people looking at her, expecting her to be something she wasn't. "Yes, sir," she said. Vance studied her for a moment. "You don't like the attention." It wasn't a question. "No, sir," he nodded. "Good. The ones who do are usually the wrong ones." He picked up another file. "I'm also reassigning you. Effective immediately, you're the flight lead for the 2-ship CAS rotation." Flight lead. That meant she'd be in charge of coordinating missions, making tactical decisions, mentoring younger pilots. It was a position usually reserved for captains with twice her flight hours and 3 times her confidence. "Sir, are you sure?" "I'm sure," Vance said. "You've proven you can handle the hard calls. Now prove you can teach someone else to do the same." He dismissed her with a wave. Raina left the office, her mind spinning. Flight lead. She'd never wanted that kind of responsibility, never thought she was ready for it. But Vance didn't make mistakes. If he thought she could do it, maybe she could. Her first sortie as flight lead was the following Monday. She briefed a young lieutenant named Ortiz, a pilot fresh out of Luke Air Force Base with exactly 40 hours in the A-10. He was nervous, talking too fast, asking too many questions. Raina let him finish, then cut through the noise. "Listen," she said. "You're going to be scared, that's fine. Fear keeps you sharp, but don't let it make your decisions." Ortiz nodded. "How do you do it? Stay calm, I mean." Raina thought about the valley, the Shilka. The moment before she pulled the trigger. "You don't," she said. "You just move forward anyway." They launched at dawn. The mission was a show of force over a village near the border, a routine flight meant to remind the Taliban that the sky belonged to someone else. Raina kept Ortiz on her wing, calling out checkpoints, altitudes, threats. He followed her lead, his flying smooth but tentative. They hit their waypoints, made the low pass, and turned for home. Easy. On the way back, Ortiz's voice crackled over the radio. "Nailbiter, you ever think about how crazy this is? That we're out here just flying around with all this firepower, waiting for someone to need us." Raina smiled, though he couldn't see it. "Every day. Does it get easier?" She thought about that. About the missions that went right and the ones that didn't. About the pilots who made it home and the ones who ended up as grid coordinates and casualty reports. "No," she said. "But you get better at carrying it." Ortiz went quiet. They flew the rest of the way in silence. When they landed, Raina debriefed him on the tarmac, pointing out what he'd done well and what needed work. He listened, nodding, and when she finished, he looked at her with something like awe. "Thank you," he said, "for being patient." Raina shrugged. "You'll do fine, just don't overthink it." As he walked away, she realized she meant it. Ortiz would be okay. He had the instincts, the discipline. He just needed time. She thought about her own early days, the mistakes she'd made, the flights she'd barely survived. Nobody had been patient with her. She'd learned by failing, by scraping through on luck and stubbornness. Maybe she could give Ortiz something better. Maybe that was part of the job now. That night, sitting in her quarters, she pulled out a letter she'd started writing weeks ago. It was addressed to her mother back in Ohio, though Raina had never sent it. She read the first line. "I think about Dad every time I fly." She folded the letter and put it back in her locker. Some things didn't need to be said. The weeks blurred together. Missions, briefs, flights that ended without incident and flights that didn't. Reyna flew with Ortiz, molding him into the kind of pilot who could think under pressure, who could put steel on target without hesitation. She flew with others too, captains and lieutenants, experienced and green, each one bringing their own strengths and weaknesses. She learned to lead not by barking orders but by example, by showing them what it looked like to stay calm when the world was on fire. In late October, the SEALs came back. A different team, a different mission, but the same desperate call for close air support. Reyna and Ortiz were airborne within minutes, racing toward the grid coordinates, the valley opening below them like déjà vu. This time it was easier. She knew the terrain, knew the angles, knew how the enemy would move and where they'd hide. She talked Ortiz through the approach, keeping her voice steady, breaking down the chaos into manageable steps. Watch the ridgeline. See that shadow? That's a fighting position. We'll suppress it first, then shift to the secondary target. Ortiz's voice was tight but controlled. Copy, I'm with you. They rolled in together, her on the left, him on the right, and the valley erupted in fire and smoke. The mission lasted 18 minutes. When it was over, the SEALs were safe, the enemy was scattered, and Ortiz had put his first rounds on target. Back at Bagram, he was shaking as he climbed out of the cockpit. That was intense, Reyna finished. Yeah. Ortiz nodded. I thought I was going to screw it up. You didn't, she met his eyes. You did exactly what you needed to do. That's all anyone can ask. He smiled, the kind of smile that comes from surviving something you weren't sure you would. Thanks, Nailbiter. She watched him walk away, and for the first time in a long time she felt something close to pride, not in herself, in him, in the fact that she'd helped him get through it. That night, Colonel Vance called her into his office again. This time he had a bottle of whiskey on his desk and 2 glasses. Sit, he said. She did. He poured 2 fingers into each glass and slid one across the desk. To the valley, he said. She clinked her glass against his and drank. The whiskey burned going down. Vance refilled both glasses. You know what they're saying about you now? Reyna shook her head. They're saying you're the best CAS pilot in theater. She didn't know how to respond to that. Vance leaned back. I've been doing this a long time, Kavet. I've seen a lot of pilots, the flashy ones, the reckless ones, the ones who think they're invincible. He paused. You're none of those things, you're something better. What's that? Dependable, Vance said. When the call comes, you show up, you do the job, you bring people home. That's worth more than any medal. The Distinguished Flying Cross ceremony was held in November, on a cold morning when the mountains were dusted with snow. Reyna stood at attention while a general she'd never met pinned the medal to her uniform and said words she didn't hear. The other pilots applauded. Cameras flashed. She smiled because it was expected and shook hands with people whose names she forgot immediately. Afterward, Kane and his team were there, standing off to the side. Kane approached, still wearing his sling, though the arm was healing. Congratulations, he said. Reyna shrugged. It's just a piece of metal. No, Kane said. It's not. It's a reminder for everyone who sees it that when it mattered, you didn't hesitate. He looked at the medal on her chest. You earned that. Don't let anyone tell you different. Reyna nodded, her throat tight. Kane clapped her on the shoulder and walked away. She stood there for a moment, alone in the crowd, and let herself feel it. The weight, the responsibility, the knowledge that she'd been tested and hadn't broken. That evening she flew again, a routine patrol, nothing special. But as she climbed into the sky, the A-10 steady beneath her, she felt something shift. The fear was still there, it always would be, but it didn't control her anymore. She keyed the radio. Overlord Nailbiter checking in on station. Vance's voice came back. Copy, Nailbiter. You're cleared to the northwest sector. Stay sharp. She banked toward the mountains, the sun setting behind her, casting long shadows across the valleys. Somewhere down there, men were fighting. Somewhere, someone would need her. And when they did, she'd be ready. She always was. The A-10 droned on, low and slow, the cannon loaded, the wings heavy with ordnance. Reyna scanned the horizon, her hands light on the stick, her mind calm. This was her place. Not in the ceremony, not in the medal, but here, in the cockpit, in the sky, doing the job. And as the mountains rose to meet her, she thought about her father, about the wheat field, about all the flights that had led her to this moment. Thanks, Dad, she whispered. The radio crackled, but no one answered. She didn't need them to. She flew on, alone but not lonely, her shadow racing across the earth, a guardian in the fading light. And somewhere below, someone looked up and saw her, saw the warthog silhouette against the sky, and knew they were safe. The war didn't end. It never really did. The missions kept coming and Reyna kept flying. She mentored more pilots, led more strikes, became the person others turned to when the situation was impossible and the stakes were life and death. Ortiz became one of the best pilots in the squadron, and he told anyone who'd listen that it was because of her. She deflected the praise, as always, but she couldn't deny the satisfaction of watching him succeed. In December, she hit 1,000 flight hours in the A-10. The squadron threw her a small party complete with a cake shaped like a warthog. She cut the first slice and handed it to Ortiz. "You've come a long way," she said. He grinned. "Learned from the best." The other pilots raised their glasses. Someone started a chant. Nail-biter, nail-biter," she laughed genuinely for the first time in months. That night, lying in her cot, she thought about how much had changed. She wasn't the cautious pilot anymore. Wasn't the one people doubted. She was the one they called when things went bad. The one they trusted. It was a strange feeling, terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure, but she'd earned it, every second of it. In January, her deployment ended. She packed her gear, said goodbye to the crew chiefs, and climbed into a transport plane bound for Ramstein. As the plane lifted off, she looked out the window at Afghanistan shrinking below, the mountains like scars on the earth. She thought about the valley, about Kane and his team, about the Shilka and the smoke, and the moment she decided to roll in, knowing it might be the last decision she ever made. She'd made it out. Not everyone did, but she had, and that meant something. The plane banked west and Bagram disappeared into the haze. Reyna closed her eyes and let the roar of the engines carry her home. Back in the States, she was reassigned to Davis-Monthan Air Force Base in Arizona, where she trained new A-10 pilots. The work was different, less adrenaline, more patience, but she found it fulfilling. She taught them the things she'd learned the hard way: how to stay calm, how to prioritize, how to make the hard calls. One afternoon, a young pilot, barely 23, still wide-eyed and eager, asked her what it was like. "The combat, the real thing." Reyna thought about it. "It's nothing like you think," she said. "And exactly like you think." The pilot frowned. "I don't understand," Reyna smiled. "You will." She walked out to the flight line where an A-10 sat waiting, its paint faded, its cannon long and lethal. She ran her hand along the fuselage, feeling the rivets and the scars. This was her place, not in the spotlight, not in the stories people told, but here, in the work, in the mission, in the knowledge that when someone needed her, she'd be there. Years passed. Reyna made major, then lieutenant colonel. She commanded a squadron, then a group. She deployed twice more, to different wars, different deserts, different valleys. But the mission was always the same: protect the people on the ground, bring them home. By the time she retired, she'd logged over 3,000 hours in the A-10. She'd been awarded 2 more distinguished flying crosses, a Bronze Star, and a dozen other medals she kept in a box and never looked at. The Air Force held a ceremony for her retirement. Generals spoke, colleagues reminisced. Someone played a video montage of her career, set to music that was too dramatic. She stood on stage wearing her dress uniform, the medals heavy on her chest, and listened to them talk about her like she was a legend. When it was her turn to speak, she kept it short. "I'm not special," she said. "I just showed up. Every time. That's all any of us can do." The audience applauded. She stepped down from the stage and walked out into the Arizona sun where Ortiz was waiting. He was a major now, with his own flight lead position, his own proteges. "How does it feel?" he asked. Reyna shrugged. "Strange, like I left something unfinished." "You didn't," Ortiz said. "You taught us how to finish it." She smiled. "Don't screw it up." He laughed. "I won't." They shook hands and Reyna walked to her car. As she drove off the base, she glanced in the rearview mirror at the flight line, at the A-10 sitting in neat rows, waiting for their next mission. She thought about Kane, about the valley, about all the moments when the world had narrowed to a single decision and she'd chosen to act. She'd made it through, not unscathed, not unchanged, but through. And that, she realized, was enough. She turned onto the highway, the desert stretching out ahead of her, vast and empty and full of possibility. The sky above was clear, endless. She drove toward it, and for the first time in a long time she felt at peace. Somewhere, a new pilot was climbing into an A-10, running through the pre-flight checks, preparing for their first combat sortie. They were scared. They were uncertain. But they'd been trained by someone who knew what it meant to fly into the fire and come out the other side. And when the call came, they'd be ready, just like she'd been, just like she'd taught them to be. The road stretched on, and Raina drove into the light, the past behind her, the future unwritten. And in the sky above, an A-10 roared to life, its engine spinning up, its cannon loaded, ready for whatever came next. 20 years after the valley, a documentary crew tracked Raina down. She was living in Colorado, a small house near the mountains, teaching part-time at a community college. They wanted to interview her for a film about close air support in Afghanistan. She almost said no. But then they mentioned Kane. He'd contacted them, they said, told them the story, insisted they find her. So she agreed. The interview took place in her backyard, the mountains rising in the distance, the sky a perfect blue. The director asked her about the mission, about the Shilka, about the gun run that people still talked about in pilot training courses. Raina answered the questions, her voice steady, her memories sharp. But when the director asked how she felt about it now, she paused. "I think about it every day," she said, "not because it was heroic, but because it was necessary and because I was the one who had to do it." "Do you regret it?" the director asked. "No," Raina said, "but I carry it, all of it. The people I saved, the people I killed, the decisions I made." She looked at the camera. "That's what it means to be a pilot. You carry the weight so someone else doesn't have to." The documentary aired a year later. It became a minor sensation, shared on social media, watched by millions. People called her a hero, an inspiration, a legend. Raina didn't watch it. She didn't need to. She knew what she'd done, knew what it had cost, and she knew that the real story wasn't about her. It was about the men on the ground, the ones who'd called for help and trusted that someone would answer. She thought about Kane, about his team, about the purple smoke rising through the dust, and she hoped they were okay, hoped they'd found peace the way she was trying to. One morning she received a package, no return address. Inside was a photograph. 8 men standing in front of a Black Hawk, grinning at the camera. On the back, a message: "We made it, thanks to you." Raina set the photograph on her mantle next to her father's wings. She stood there for a long time, looking at the 2 images side by side. 2 generations, 2 wars, the same sky. She thought about everything she'd learned, about fear and courage, about duty and sacrifice, about the moments that define us and the ones that break us. And she realized that she wouldn't change a thing. Not the fear, not the pain, not the weight, because it had made her who she was, a pilot, a leader, a guardian, and that was enough. She walked outside into the Colorado morning, the mountains rising around her, the sky endless and bright. Somewhere a new war was starting. Somewhere a pilot was climbing into a cockpit, scared and uncertain and ready. And somewhere the spirit of the warthog lived on, in the roar of the cannon, in the shadow on the ground, in the knowledge that when the call came, someone would answer. Always.